Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double One Radio Gamescast. It's episode number 55. Today we're going to be talking about sci-fi and fantasy and delivering your setting in games. Not specifically like sci-fi and fantasy elements, but getting your setting across to the player. As always, I am your host, Ryan, and I'm joined by my lovely duo of co-hosts, Brett and Wyatt.
Hi. Hello.
You sound confused. Are you sure you're supposed to be here?
No.
Well, you're too late.
Oh,
You've
darn it.
stumbled into the pit. All right.
I don't know. Ryan came into my room and he just shoved $20 in my hands and said, "Hey, do you want to be in an episode of a podcast?" And I was like,
just one
20
more
bucks
week,
is
he
20
said.
bucks.
No, I mean,
just one more episode, he said.
Well, I took the $20 out of your hand. I didn't give it to you.
Where's my check? Oh, right. You already took it. I forgot.
Yeah. All right. So, we've got some fun video game rumors and news from the last week and a half of stuff. But first, we're gonna start with clearing up the ongoing mystery around Days Gone 2 and Sony that we had mentioned last week that we wanted to take a little time to look into the actual situation. So we're going off currently of what Jason Schreier is reporting because he has an extremely stellar record of being correct about literally everything. So according to Schreier and interviews he's had with unnamed developers at the studio for obvious reasons of them not getting fired, the Days Gone 2 was rejected in 2019 and is not in active development. So, clarifying what this means, rejected means the game was pitched to Sony and was not accepted as being something that we're going to work on. That doesn't mean Days Gone 2 will never happen, but it means it's far less likely. And there are other rumors floating around that the pitch they were doing was related to a shared world multiplayer version of the game, which makes very little sense having played the first game. So that might have something to do with it. And the director of Days Gone 1 and the writer have both left the studio for a while now. It's been Jeff Ross, the game's director, left a couple months ago, and the writer of the first game left basically immediately after the first game released. So yeah, Days Gone 2 is looking unlikely, or just it will be very different if it does come out eventually. It's kind of a shame because I really enjoyed Days Gone, but
I'm playing through it right now, and I'm really loving it.
yeah, it's a
Definitely.
very, very interesting take on the zombie open world genre.
Don't let the fact that it's a zombie game deter you at all.
Yeah,
is what I'll say.
I am as indifferent as they come.
Yeah, I mean, but that's you on kind of everything, Brett.
That's not true, and you know it.
You just sound so defeated, Brett. Defeated by the zombie genre.
Zombie genre.
You can't even muster a full sentence.
No,
Right?
I can't.
It's almost like
one.
me. It's almost like me talking about a JRPG. It's kind of depressing.
I mean, we had some detailed conversations about FF7, so give yourself some credit, Wyatt. You tried a new thing, and unlike Brett, actually gave it a chance.
No, it was
Like
the
Brett in zombie
remake.
games.
No, it was the remake. So in terms of JRPGs, I was cheating a little bit.
Well, it was certainly Baby's first JRPG, but
and it certainly had a lot of gobbledygook in it.
in techno jargon. Speaking
Yes.
of techno jargon, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition went gold and is confirmed to be coming out May 14th. We knew the date for a while, but it's gone gold and looks real good. They showed a bunch of lighting redos that I think the interesting thing with the lighting is that, at least in Mass Effect 1, it's pretty different from what the game originally looked like, but it's a lot closer to the concept art, which is interesting. I think that means they were really going for a spiritual remake and not a direct remake. They really wanted to capture the spirit of what those areas were meant to originally look like and not what they actually looked like.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting because there's been a mixed reaction to it.
Personally speaking, I'm not going to be getting it because there's not going to be nearly as many tuckuses in it, which means I'm definitely not buying it. So, whatever.
I'm so glad you've clarified that for me, Wyatt.
Thank God.
as of 2 days ago, this is only impacting me because no one else here plays racing games, unless Brett, you're about to pull out another surprise.
And no, just only Ridge Racer 4. That's it.
So I don't talk about it a lot on the press on the podcast because it hasn't really come up yet, but I do play a lot of racing games. Recently, a lot of Forza. But there's a racing game that's been chugging along for near a decade now that has just suddenly overtaken the title of the most selling racing game ever made. That is Mario Kart 8.
Okay.
From the Wii U.
That's not a surprise.
I just love that the best-selling racing game in history is a kart racer. From a Nintendo console.
Like when you like, if someone asks me like, oh, what's the best selling? Immediately what comes to mind is like Forza
and like GT Sport.
Yeah.
Like in early 2000s, GT Sport hasn't really done anything in a long time, but
or
Forza,
like,
Instant Think.
Yeah, Instant Think.
Instant Think.
That's gonna be my new. That's gonna be my new thing. I'm gonna start saying Instant Think because it's funny.
We got another hotfix patch for Cyberpunk, and they call it a hotfix. It's actually a fairly substantial set of fixes. So another step in the right direction, which is just encouraging to see that we're getting more, and it's happening a lot faster now than the first two patches after the whole issue with the hacking.
I haven't played it since any of these new like updates went live. I've been meaning to go back and see if I notice a difference. I will say I was relatively like safe when it came to bugs and stuff. Like there were definitely little graphical bugs and stuff, but nothing too major. It was mostly just performance I was having an issue with.
Yeah, like
everyone else.
My run through, I was pretty lucky. I didn't get any major bugs. Nothing beyond like a level of what I would expect to see in like a Ubisoft game.
You know what did bug out for me though? That was really terrible. The first time you meet Johnny Silverhand, it completely bugged out, and I was like, my head had clipped into the bed, and so that whole first encounter with him, I had no idea what was going on.
That was the only recurring bug I had. Is Johnny Silverhand's effects would sometimes stick around after he left.
But, yep.
And by left, I don't mean like Johnny Silverhand leaving. I mean the when he would disappear from a cutscene, the like static effect would keep up. But yeah, we'll talk about Cyberpunk at some point. That games club episode will happen. We just don't know when.
We just keep delaying it. We're sticking to the spirit of Cyberpunk, and we just keep delaying it.
Because we haven't set a date yet, so we're doing a little bit better.
True.
We need to come out with like a little teaser trailer, and
in neon yellow.
Exactly.
Yep. I mean,
and then have Brett come out in he could just cosplay as Johnny Silverhand and just be like,
all we gotta do is show up at Microsoft's E3 conference.
Wake the heck up, 001 Radio. We have an episode to
burn.
I mean, that's on brand. So, all right. Jeez, we're already so off topic.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Wyatt. I did want to bring up a little rumor we've been given, courtesy of IGN. Not IGN actually, but VGC, Video Games Chronicle, is that the BioShock 4 job listings have been listing it as an open world game.
Oh no!
Which is curious. I'm curious to see how this works, because I think my immediate reaction is there's so many open world shooters that there's nothing appealing in that.
Yeah.
And not to say that especially the original BioShock wasn't completely like linear. There was definitely some backtracking to previous eras, but I would not call it an open world game by any stretch of the imagination.
I do think Infinite had sections that felt very open world. Part of that is just due to the fact that Infinite had some stellar level design in a few areas, but there were some distinct moments where it really seemed like it was almost open world. So I kind of think we have a sense of what that might look like if they do make it truly open world. Of it being this, like,
if they make it open world in the sense of like, I'm imagining what a completely like open world Columbia would be like, or an open world Rapture would be like, and that does sound enticing because it wouldn't be like a traditional like, oh, open world, like here's some land, some mountains, some like bodies of water or whatever. Like if you had an environment that was completely open-ended, but it was still contained within like Rapture or Columbia, that actually does sound kind of enticing.
I think the key thing is what I really don't want to see here is it to be an open world landmass
Yes.
of just generic Far Cry style shooter setting.
I'm especially thinking of like Odyssey or Valhalla, where it's just space for the sake of having space and no other reason.
Yeah.
So I hope that's not the case at all.
The specific job phrasing here was that we're hoping to find someone, this is for the writing position, who can create impactful character-driven stories in an open-world setting. There are also some audio design positions that listed AAA narratively driven FPS project full of character and personality, because the important thing here is that these don't actively list Bioshock 4 as the thing that you're working on, because that's what most game studios do when they list a job, unless it's a released project like something like a Destiny where it's ongoing, a live service game. Generally what you're gonna see is if it's something where like it's been announced, so like Elder Scrolls 6, you will probably see on Bethesda's site, if you're looking for careers, Elder Scrolls 6 or like Elder Scrolls in general. But if it's something like a Fallout game that hasn't been announced yet, you'll likely just see unannounced title or unannounced project. You can kind of get hints as to what those will be by the job descriptions, which is pretty common.
You can put 2 and 2 together a lot of the time. Yeah,
because like the company needs people that know what they're doing in very specific areas. That's why it's like notoriously hard to break into AAA studios like this, because they're looking for super specific things. Of like, when they say they're looking for a writer that can weave impactful character-driven stories in an open-world setting, that means they're looking for someone with experience writing open-world settings. So that's like why these things tend to be accurate, is because it's what they're using to hire people. And there's not really a way to avoid it in a case like this, where Cloud Chamber doesn't really do much else aside from Bioshock. So people know it's Bioshock.
It would be like if Infinity Ward put out a job listing for like sound design for a multiplayer first person shooter. I wonder what that could be.
So I think this is interesting, because I think an open world Bioshock has a lot of potential, and is something that could be really good, but I don't have very much faith in the AAA games industry right now to pull that off. To like restrain themselves enough from the open world.
Restraint
like,
is
design.
The right. Restraint is the correct word there, definitely.
Yeah, because it's not like I think there's too much scope. It is literally, I think they will go too far.
Yeah.
No, and we've been seeing that. I mean, it's what Ryan and I have been talking about forever with Assassin's Creed, where their worlds just keep getting bigger and bigger, and so they have to fill it with more stuff that is never going to be as high quality because they don't have as much time to work on it. I think that was, we were just talking about Days Gone, right? I think that's one of the strengths of Days Gone, is that it's actually, when you look at it as a whole, it's a pretty like condensed open world compared to other like AAA open world games.
It has a lot of like landmark areas. Like you're going to be revisiting and learning the landscape.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Like learning those areas and learning the ins and outs, especially like, oh, I know I can get gas here, or oh, I know there's some spare ammo that I left behind a while ago, like there. Like it's actually way better this way, to like be able to learn these areas and know the ins and outs, rather than just like, oh, here's generic Greek temple number 725B.
Yeah,
Why? I mean, this one's 4 times the size of Fallout 4.
16 times or 15 times, excuse me. I got my math wrong. I didn't carry the 3.
But yeah, I definitely agree, because like my favorite open world in any game, I talk about Yakuza all the time. Yakuza has Kamurocho, which is tiny by open world comparisons. Like it is the size of like a couple of blocks in a GTA game. But it's packed so densely with detail that you cannot go 10 feet without finding something cool. Literally, like you walk 10 feet, you will find some weird cool thing you can do. And that is so much more fun than having like walking 30 minutes of gameplay, unless you're in the mood for like one of those super lax, what we would probably call podcast games, where you're playing it just as like a way to de-stress and just relax and like enjoy the landscape. That's totally fine. Like in that situation, you do want those big sprawling land masses. But for a focused like Bioshock game,
yeah, I mean, if you even want to compare Ubisoft open worlds. Like I played Assassin's Creed, I played Watch Dogs Legion, and I played Immortals basically back to back, right? And it was no comparison in the sense that Immortals it was much smaller, but it was the results of it being so much smaller were like immediately noticeable. Like the world design in that game is like excellent, like especially for an Ubisoft game. It's really, really well done. And it's because it was a lot smaller and they were able to focus on like nicer looking areas rather than just having to spread everything out.
All right.
know?
So I want to ask you two, what do you think of when I say Amazon Game Studios?
Disaster.
Fire.
Well,
and brimstone.
I'm sad that it wasn't cancellation because we have yet
Oh,
another
was the
Amazon
implication.
Studios cancellation.
Mhm.
They have canceled the Lord of the Rings MMO that was first announced in 2019. So the interesting thing with this to me is I did not know this game existed
Me neither.
until I heard it was canceled.
I think I heard rumblings about it from somewhere, but I didn't know if it
heard
was like
Amazon was doing something with Lord of the Rings, but that was
I didn't know if it was actually like a rumor worth, like if it was actually truthful or not. Like I just didn't put any stock in it.
And this is interesting because this is coming like after both Crucible, Breakaway, and Breakaway were canceled, and New World has been delayed repeatedly. So this is a little concerning with Amazon Game Studios, if you weren't already concerned. The interesting thing here is that apparently the cause of this cancellation is not like the game development, it is disagreements between Amazon and Tencent. So I don't know what the distinctions of this are. It's been said that they're just unable to secure terms to proceed with the title is like the phrase they've been using, but we have no clue what that means. We have no clue how far along this game was. Apparently people are very disappointed that it was canceled.
See anything from it yet? Why could you be disappointed?
And the thing that gets me
Nothing.
is there's already a Lord of the Rings MMO that's pretty good. Like the Lord of the Rings MMO, it's old, but it is like a very solid MMO if you're looking for a Lord of the Rings MMO for some reason. So no, I think you've got options that aren't Amazon's probably bad MMO that they're working on.
My thing is like how many games do they have left? Like
New World.
They have-
that is it.
New
right
World.
now.
Yep.
Anything
Which is in
they
good
have
hands. It was made
announced.
by the people that made Crucible, so it's obviously in good hands.
I mean, like after that, like that's got to be it. Like it would just be even if you're Amazon who has like quadrillions of dollars, just throw it. Apparently, literally nothing. Like you have to stop at some point. You have to realize that maybe no, this isn't. We're literally not doing anything, and it's been years, and every single project has ended in failure or has not ended and just failed before it could. Maybe we should stop. Just maybe.
Just maybe. Just
You
hold off a little bit. And I think that's like a repeated thing we're talking about is a lot of game studios just need to exercise a little bit of restraint and not try to do everything.
Yeah.
Because like
Right.
I think the big thing with Assassin's Creed Valhalla that we've talked about is that like Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a super expensive game to make. And the issues with the game are the fact that they spent so much money and time on putting so much extra stuff in that just isn't high quality or isn't like core to the experience. Like it would be less expensive to make a game that people probably would have enjoyed a little bit more. So I'm hoping that Valhalla is a sign that they can like back off a little bit. I don't think they will. I don't think Ubisoft has it in them. But just like take a step back and be like, okay, do we really need 3 land masses? Do we really need like however many 100 side quests?
It's
Oh
the
no,
next
no,
step
Ryan, it's
in
technically
gaming.
4 land masses.
Oh
Because you're
god, I
counting
forgot
wrong.
about the fourth
It's-
one. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
technically 4.
It's not even technically 4. It is 4. I mean,
25,000 times the size of Fallout 4.
Well, and it's so sad too when you see like there's a lot of things in Ubisoft games where it's like, man, if you didn't spend so much time making such a big world, and you could kind of focus things a little bit more, like, because they have a lot of interesting ideas in most of their games that they can never expand on because they don't have the time or the money or some combination of both to actually like execute them properly. Like if they had focused Watch Dogs down a little bit more and like really fleshed out some that sort of whole recruitment system more. I don't know. I'm gonna stop before I derail us again.
I think we're already there.
I mean, we're talking about settings right now, right? Valhalla has a setting.
This is going to turn into the open world discussion episode.
Leads me to our award for the day. So our award for today that we're giving out is the existing setting that we most want to see adapted into a AAA big budget video game. We're pulling out all the stops. These people have Blizzard money, they have Amazon money, and they're making a video game.
Amazon money, okay, not Amazon talent.
After seeing the results, they may not want Amazon's money.
They've got Jeff Bezos is personally funding this project. It has ensured its completion. They're pulling devs from all the AAA studios. So we're creating the perfect AAA game of an existing setting. Now, this setting could be movies, books. It could even be other games, so long as it didn't originate as a game. So like no Mass Effect. We're not tallying a new Mass Effect game because we know they're working on it. So we know that's happening. But something that is not originally games. So I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna bring up a little known book series by the name of Mistborn. Now, Mistborn is a not grimdark fantasy, but it's a dark fantasy series of books by Brandon Sanderson. They're extremely good, and the whole gist of it is because Brandon Sanderson writes magic as very hard rules, they adapt super well into video game rule sets. The whole gist of the magic in this game is that you drink alcohol that has metal flakes in it, and based on the metal that you've ingested, you get different abilities, and you're born with different ones. So you've obviously got the people that have all of them, so they can ingest some aluminum and do some weird stuff. They can ingest iron and pull things to them if they're metallic, which translates so perfectly to video game mechanics of having limited resource meters and doing different things. I just want to see someone make that. I don't know what shape it would take. Probably an RPG of some kind. I just want to see those mechanics executed from that setting in a video game so badly. And it hurts even more because there have been rumored games from this, and the author has sold the license to a couple of game developers over the years that just have never made anything with it. So It's super sad. But I want to see something. I need to see that video game. Let me play it. All right.
Sounds cool.
I can go next if we're moving on, because there's a Netflix show that not a lot of people have heard of that I think would make a great video game. It's based on a book series. I think it's a really interesting world, and I just think it would make a great video game. It's called The Witcher.
I was gonna make the joke that you were gonna say that, and you actually did.
No, I'm kidding. Immediately, what comes to mind is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Just 100%. That's what came to
Wyatt,
mind.
I'm glad we were on the same page because there's a reason I didn't say Avatar. It's because I thought you were going for it.
Yep. I think it's there's so much potential there because it's a lot like Star Wars in the sense that you could make almost any video game genre based on that series. You could do an RPG, you could do a hack and slash, you could do a Telltale style narrative thing, you could do a strategy game, you could
do a full-blown MMO.
The possibilities with this world are endless. And again, I think the rules of the world fits really well into a video game setting.
Because they're martial arts, and martial arts adapt super well to games when it's done right.
Yeah, and it's just, and whether it's original Avatar: The Last Airbender, or whether it's Korra, the much later on in that series. Like literally anything. It doesn't matter because it just fits all genres. There's just so much potential there, and I am legitimately shocked that we only got 3 of them, and only like 1.5 of them have been good.
Yeah.
And I just think there's so much wasted potential on such a great beloved
Because
franchise.
there are moments in the Legend of Korra game where you go like, I could almost see how good this could have been if
Like,
it was
what
like a
if we
full
got
budget title.
like, and I'm more of a single player guy than like a competitive multiplayer guy, but competitive pro bending, like
It would be
it's
so
right there.
fun.
It's right there.
They have the game mechanics, they have everything working. It just isn't multiplayer.
Oh man, I mean, the only there were like 3 Avatar games that were for like the PS2 and I think GameCube and Xbox or something like that, and
Most
the
of them
Wii
are
as
like
well.
kind of okay. This does
The
bring
Platinum
me
one
to a
was
slight,
not very good.
yeah, except for the pro bending.
Yeah.
So I have a Raspberry Pi set up as an emulation machine, and there is an Avatar GBA game that is really good.
Oh, really?
Like really good. It's like this weird GBA puzzle action game. You got different party members. You have to like order them in your party to different bits, and like Sokka's got his boomerang. If you have Aang, you can do some bending tricks and whatnot. And you learn more as it goes on. It only covers like the first book, so it's not very much, but it is like a really, really fun, like cool proof of it, how an Avatar adventure game on the GBA would work. Yeah, so there are some fun Avatar games, but nothing like AAA, full blown. Give it to me.
One that I remember playing constantly when I was a kid was it was basically like baby's first Diablo, but it was an Avatar game. So they had like a full loot system. It was also an original story, and it had a lot of characters that you recognize from the series, but it was its own like weird original story that was actually kind of interesting and kind of cool, and it wasn't bad. Like I don't think it's nothing special, but it's not bad, especially for making a Diablo style game, which is not the first thing that comes to mind. But again, it speaks to how versatile the property is. You could make anything.
All right.
It's just such a waste.
Brett, what do you got?
I think we all accidentally came here wanting the exact same thing to be a video game with magic and abilities based off of the things that are around you and the things that are in the world that you could change. That's right. Full Metal Alchemist.
Oh my God, Brett!
Because there have been some games that are like hack and slashy, like
It's a weird
for the
PS2 game.
PS2 or something, yeah. But like you could just a full blown adventure game in that world would be so awesome. Because like there's a lot of different Full Metal Alchemist things, but they all kind of go to the same places most of the time, since they're all like adaptations of the same thing. Like the 2 animes are just different adaptations of the same manga. So it would be nice to see like more of the world that you'd be able to go around and explore. Because I was like I was thinking about how I would explain, what sort of setting it's in, and it's not quite steampunk. It's not quite interwar. It's not quite
It's basically
fantasy.
Final Fantasy 12.
It's kind of, but like even then, like Final Fantasy 12 is like super like ornate and very
a little
like
too high tech.
It's like more high tech and very like fantastical in its designs, but FMAs are super like factory, like just came out of the metalworks, and everything is like super like just built to be used, and that's it. But then you have all the cool abilities on it, and like especially with how like creatively they use them and stuff. I don't know. It would just be a really sweet game to see, more than just like the little hack and slashes that came out on like the PS2.
Brett, I'm gonna say, I want to see an Arc System Works fighting game of FMA.
Oh my god!
I think
they
that
have
would
enough
work
characters.
super well.
That would be so much fun. I don't even like fighting games, and I would get it just because it would be fun. But then it might be like I I don't know. It might be like Kill la Kill if or whatever the one fighting game was, and it would just might
Well,
not
that
be
was
good, and that'd be sad.
published by Arc System Works, not made by
Well,
Arc
yeah,
System Works.
it's a fighting game of an anime. Okay, that's the comparison.
There's a lot of fighting games with a lot of animes, and most of them are bad, bro. You want good, you got a very limited selection. All right, we got to pick a winner. I'm gonna start. I gotta give my vote to Avatar for I think the exact reasons that Watt outlined. It's just, and the reasons Brett outlined. I just think Avatar translates a little bit better to a video game because there are slightly lesser restrictions than Full Metal has. I think Full Metal's got a little bit too crunchy of a alchemy system that unless you're playing as the characters directly from the anime where you have like specific outlined abilities that they can use, it's hard to translate that into game mechanics and make it make sense. Whereas I think Avatar is just pliable enough that it would work really well.
Yeah. I mean, my vote, not just because it's mine, but I also vote for myself.
You evil man, I vote for you too.
Yeah.
All right. So
so.
officially, Avatar is the franchise that most needs another game.
Please. It would be.
Dude, I'm just imagining how amazing an Avatar MMO would be with like your factions of the different nations. Your class is just like the type of bending you do.
I just want like a narrative, like melee combat, like narrative focused.
Like a platinum game.
Yeah, I'm already or like a Fallen Order type of thing. You know, like you could do a light, Dark Soulsy kind of thing with it.
I think you need someone experienced with martial arts style.
Well, I'm saying that style of game that they made works well. Not that studio specifically.
Yeah, I think Respawn doesn't have martial arts in them yet. Maybe a few more years they can get
a few more Fallen Orders, and maybe they'll get there.
All right, so that leads us into our next discussion of we want to talk about how video games differ than other media in presenting their setting. So looking at fantastical and sci-fi settings, how does a game present the setting to you in ways that are different and not necessarily doable in other forms of media? So I think classic example of this is something like Halo, where Halo has a far more limited amount of words to get setting across to you, but you have far more time looking at everything. So it's a lot of it's in the architecture and like the weapon designs, the map designs. How does the Forerunner stuff is all like industrial concrete in the early games and like super stark, almost brutalistic architecture that just like kind of gets across what that race of people was like without needing to actually tell you. So yeah, that kind of thing. Now, Wyatt, I'm gonna call on you first because I know you've got something waiting.
I mean, immediately, and this is less specific to that, but like what immediately comes to mind to me is that video games just have the time to showcase things more through a combination of like the actual length of time, right? Like games are allowed to be kind of as long as they want in a sense, and so you just have that time to explain your world more, but also you're explaining it through like, oh, here's this weapon, here's how you use this weapon, and just by showing the player the ropes of like your combat system or how this system or how this mechanic works, it's also explaining the world at the same time, because we have that advantage. Games, well, by we I mean games have the advantage of like there's a lot of explaining things because there's a lot of tutorials that are showing you what to do, and that's also a really good way to get a lot of the details of your setting out there at the same time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think where that most tends to come out is stuff like, I'll use Final Fantasy VII as the example because Wyatt's now familiar with that. So materia is something that they highlight a lot as being super important, but it's not often directly in the narrative. It's more just like a thing that makes things function there. And the way you often get that, you kind of experience that, is that it's the primary way of using abilities in the game. It's how you do all your character builds and stuff. So you know materia is important, when you're having to do all these things to like organize your inventory and make sure you've got the right materia assigned to the right character, even without like any of the narrative surrounding it, you kind of know how important that stuff is. Just a neat little way of making stuff like that function.
Yeah.
All right, Brett. I know you're steaming in your corner.
I have like 5 things going through my brain at once, and I just need to just roulette and just pick one.
Only 5. Only
I'm sorry,
5.
I can only handle single digits, White. I'm not that smart.
What, did you not carry the 7 again?
I did not carry the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade Deluxe Edition.
Intergrade intermission.
Oh god, there's intermission now too.
Okay. Brief tangent. Intergrade Final Fantasy
days.
VII Remake Intergrade is just the name of the PS5 version. The DLC with Yuffie is called Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade Intermission.
Rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? Oh man.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Brett.
Well, it just kind of. I mean, this just kind of comes from just games being games compared to non-experiential media and art. But like you get to actually experience the things that are in these kinds of settings that are not in real life. Like you don't have whatever they try to make a save point be in real life, so they have to make that be a Moogle or some kind of like rune or something that you go up to and save at, and they have to make things like that you have to have mechanically because video game. If they're designed well and smartly, then they'll probably be designed in a way that they'll fit the setting, so they don't stick out more than you being able to notice them as a player. And you don't really get that. You don't really get anything similar to that with like movies or anything. Like you can have like if a director like does a bunch of stuff with a bunch of films and a bunch of different genres, and you can get like Easter eggs of like I can't think of an example without thinking of the horrible what has happened to the Cloverfield franchise. But like how like the soda shows up here, that means it's in the same universe, but like with more nuance than that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then because game are game, then you can go even further with that. And you can do things that like I don't know, like a Kojima or like a Xenogears would do, where like, oh, you go to the factory to see where the futuristic save sigils are being produced, and they actually mean something in the world and aren't just the yellow save symbol that you go up to. Ooh.
I do gotta say,
think-
there is one movie that I've seen that does that. That's Edge of Tomorrow. It's like
Yes.
the only movie I think I've seen ever attempt something like that. Which doesn't mean there haven't been others that have done it. I'm not as much of a film buff as I am a games buff, but yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I do love those little excuses, especially when a game like specifically addresses the fact that you're saving and loading.
Yes.
Like the Dark Souls is a good example of like bonfires are addressed in the narrative of being like, yeah, that is your one thing, but it's not really good. It's more you just get to suffer every time you wake up. So yeah, I love when games address that kind of thing.
What I like too is when, because it's kind of along the same lines, is when like you have a traditional mechanic that's then affected by the game that you're playing in some way. So a good example is like how fast travel is handled in a lot of games. Is like, oh, there's a fast travel point. Go to your map, select the fast travel point, and then your guy magically teleports there. But again, like I said, I've been playing Days Gone, and I think they handle fast travel in a really interesting way, where you have select fast travel points you can go to, but because a lot of the game is focused on how much gas your bike has and the condition of your bike, if the fast travel point is really, really far away, and realistically you wouldn't be able to drive there yourself on that one tank of gas, you can't go there until you get closer, until you gas up your bike more. So it's like a really traditional mechanic that's then kind of affected by the game that you're in. Another good example is like Red Dead 2, where if you want to fast travel, you have to go to a wagon, that'll take you to different places. You also have to pay the wagon and make sure you go there at like the right times of day where they're actually in operation, which is kind of annoying. But again, it's the kind of thing where it's a traditional mechanic that's affected by the setting of the game and the intent of the game, which is to like make this very immersive, like realistic cowboy simulator. And so in a more realistic cowboy setting, that's the kind of thing you would have to contend with. And they're really nice little touches that like kind of immerse you in the world more.
Yeah, I gotta agree with the Days Gone. The way Days Gone handles it is a nice middle ground of being realistic enough for a video game, where it is the semblance of realism. It's of course not realistic at all, but it's
enough. It's enough.
It's contextualized in a way that is really, really good for the setting it's in. Whereas like the Red Dead 2 thing, yeah, definitely really works for that cowboy setting. It doesn't really work for Red Dead 2 as a game as much.
I mean, and some people are into that. Some people are into like having those harsh restrictions because it immerses
exactly,
them
but you
more.
typically find those people more in like the CRPG or very crunchy MMO, like hardcore player base.
Things that are a lot less accessible.
Yeah, you tend to find those people gravitating towards those kinds of games and not towards the AAA Red Dead 2, which I think is why there was a lot of like player backlash against parts of Red Dead 2. But we'll inevitably end up having an episode about that kind of thing.
Definitely.
But yeah, so I definitely want to kind of extend that and talk a little bit about MMOs. So MMOs are on my mind recently because I've not had a lot of time to play games the last week or two, but when I have had the time, I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV. And that game does something really interesting in that it is one of those few Final Fantasy games that has finally addressed the fact that healing magic exists in the game.
Oh, okay.
And this is a recurring problem I have with almost every single... I don't want to see Final Fantasy because it's every game. It's every single game that has a spell that like either heals or reses a player. Almost never addresses the fact that those spells exist. Because there's like... It's stuff like when you're playing D&D, right? And you have a spell that brings a dead player back or a dead NPC back. That inherently changes how your setting needs to be constructed. Because like player death or NPC death is not as big of a deal anymore. So you generally need to have some way to be like, okay, this person is dead. And in D&D, that's like, if their body is gone, they are dead until you have some like ultra powerful method of like reconstructing a body. But in the case of Final Fantasy XIV, there was one specific scene in this really awesome expansion called Heavensward where I was almost shouting at the screen that I am playing as a healer right now. I have access to a spell that heals you. And there's all these people are like worried about someone, and I'm like, I can heal you right now. And so that was very frustrating. And then the thing that I like to see in MMOs is when the developers of the game like realize people's problems and address them. I reached a later quest in the game where a similar thing happens. A character then looks up at my character and goes, "What are you doing? Don't you know how to heal people? Get over here." And it's amazing because it literally does the thing where it's a cutscene where it pans to your character like standing there looking all worried, and then someone just calls you out and is like, "What are you doing?
What are you doing?"
It broke me because I went back and rewatched that to make sure I wasn't like imagining it. And if you're playing a different type of character, like if you're playing a character that's a tank or a DPS, they don't get that scene because they don't have the healing ability. But if you're playing as a healer, you get that special scene, which was, it broke me. I'm like, that's
amazing.
Something video games can do, of like actually respecting the fact that the player made a choice and is like playing as a specific thing and can do specific things. And usually you only see that in RPGs of like a single player variety, because it's a lot harder to do in an MMO, especially an MMO where you can change your class whenever you want. So it was just really refreshing to see a setting handle that and be like, yeah, you have access to the healing magic. What are you doing? Like, what? and directly like meta address that issue with older Final Fantasy games, especially where you'll have a character just like looking at someone dying and just standing there and being like, oh no, what could I do? As you look at your stockpile of potions and healing spells.
As you look at your dedicated healer character, just like, oh, if only there was something we could do.
These 75
there was
Phoenix Downs
something.
I just bought.
I'm just imagining like redoing the cutscene where like there's like a character death or something, and you're literally holding all of the like Phoenix Downs in your arms. And you're just like, if only there was something we could do. I'm so sorry.
Whatever will I do?
That's why I love the fact that cutscene was a character literally looks at you as you are standing there doing the video game sad look of like someone's dying and then yells, what are you doing? Stop gawking and help me. You know how to heal, don't you? I was like, it's one of those moments where like, you know, the people are directly addressing the issue of the earlier quest, right?
Mm-hmm.
They look directly at player feedback and we're like, okay, we understand that this was super weird, so now we're fixing it. Which is just really refreshing to see. But yeah, I think that's something interesting that games can do, of like that changing attitude over time, especially, is just super hard to pull off. But when in an MMO or a live service game, like, I think we are all holding out hope for the moment Destiny 2 does a complete 180.
I've given up hope of my life.
You know, I'll rephrase
rich.
that. I'm holding out hope that
rich.
Bungie does a 180, and I don't care about Destiny 2 anymore. I care about Bungie.
Yeah.
I want them to do well. I just don't care about that series anymore.
Yeah.
I want to see what they work on next, because I keep hearing that they're working on a new franchise, and I am interested to see what this new franchise is, especially if it's not something that's like online looter shooter
Open
stuff.
world FPS with RPG elements, always online.
Yeah.
Look, you honestly, from Bungie, you had me up until the online part.
That's
Honestly.
upsetting. That's upsetting to me.
I know.
Why?
I know it is.
Well, I mean, all I need Bungie to do is give me good gunplay and a reason to use it that is fun, and I'll be there. But as soon as you make me repeat the same quest 50 times to get a single exotic, that's when you lose me. You've lost me at that point. I'm like, I don't have the time for this.
But the grind, Ryan, it's the grind.
Yeah, but there
It's
are
just
other
part of the
grindy games. I'm playing
grind.
FF14 right now. I have yet to have to grind anything. I've played this
Just
game
give
for
me
like
a good narrative
years
reason
at this point.
Just give me a good narrative reason to do these things that either is consistently good or isn't actually pretty good up until the very end.
Yeah, it just needs to hit a minimum standard of quality. It's not even that it needs to be good. It just needs to be enough of a reason. Like Diablo 3 does that.
It needs to not bother me.
Diablo 3 just says like, oh, we've got demons are opening rifts across the world. You got to go fight these randomized demons to fight back the wave of demons. That's enough of an excuse. That is that's all I need.
Sprinkle some good character moments in there, and that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, we got our Destiny comment sandwich out of the way. Well done, guys. Well done.
Until it
course.
comes back. We're like halfway through.
Until we're hungry for another comment sandwich.
I mean, we can say like Destiny does the thing that you want to, at least did the thing you want to avoid. They're actually doing a little better of it now from the last bit I played, of delivering narrative in the game and not through external.
I don't believe you.
Things. Well, because I went back to play the online.
I am
there was
full
like a
on
cool
Hawkeye. I'm full on Hawkeye from Endgame. Just like, don't give me hope. Don't give me hope.
Well, I'm not trying to give you
Don't
hope
do
because I don't think it was particularly. It's not particularly well done or like interesting, but it's far better than what they were doing. Of go look at this like trailer we made to get the interesting story, or this Grimoire Cards website.
That you have to like
of the story
you have
being
to like
in the
shoot
game this
five
time.
they have to like shoot 5 orbs and chase your tail for 5 minutes, and then you unlock this new Grimoire card. Beautiful. That'll like let you understand about 5% of what's supposed to be going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge thing with their stuff. But I can feel both Brett and Wyatt seething. One of you.
I mean, we started talking about Destiny and I'm just steaming.
This is just anger.
It's a trigger word. It's
All right,
it's
Brett,
a trigger
topic.
topic.
Brett, you had 5 things ready. Hit me with your second.
Okay. I think, and I guess this is comparing games as a whole to more like, I'm thinking of like, I guess more Western paradigms of like science fiction and fantasy. I feel like in the space of video games, those get blended together in a lot more interesting ways than they do for at least like most like books and movies that I can think of like the top of my head. Like usually if something's being made, if like a movie is being made that is like a fantasy movie, like you think like something akin to Lord of the Rings, like you were getting sword and board, there's dragon, maybe there's a wizard and a guy with a bow, and they got to go to the mountain. And there's going to be a lot of fire inside of
There's
there,
gonna be a lot of dwarves
and a lot of
running around,
dwarves, and they get drunk, and they're
and they all
inside of
have
a
the same
mountain.
name.
They all the words that they say rhyme, and they all sound Irish or Scottish because that's what dwarves sound like. Okay, that was oddly specific, but you know what I mean. We're like the Western, um, you know, like version of fantasy where it's just like very very medieval and based in like a
Dragon's
kind of
Dogma is the baseline Western like
yeah.
medieval fantasy.
But even like that's a video game. Like there are other video games that like are in fantasy settings, and this is, I'm just talking fantasy right now, but the same thing goes for sci-fi, where there's just like there's a blend of weird things going on.
Mhm.
Like there's I wouldn't I'm playing Final Fantasy 9 right now, and I'm almost done with it. I wouldn't really call it like I wouldn't call it steampunk at all, but there are airships, and there are things that there are cable cars, and there are things that kind of reach out of fantasy, to try to make the setting more interesting than just being, fantasy story number 500,000. And the same thing, maybe a little bit of a lesser extent to sci-fi now, because I feel like a lot of sci-fi in games has become gray with neon lights and shooty shoot, and occasionally someone throws an energy ball out of their hand. Um,
Well, let's
but
not get too crazy. Let's not get
yeah,
too
space magic, boy. Oh.
Space wizards.
We're
Space
done. We're
wizards.
done with Destiny. We can't do this again.
Hey, I didn't say the
Um,
word. I just said a space wizard that maybe or may not have come from the moon. That's all I'm saying.
okay. Well, I'm gonna hope. I'm gonna hope for our sake that it didn't come from the moon. But yeah, I feel like there's more variety to the quote unquote typical settings of science fiction and fantasy in games than there is in other media usually. I don't know if that's just a
Yeah.
me thing.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, because I actively tend to seek out a lot of like fantasy media, because at least in film, because like there are plenty of fantasy books, most of them are trash, but some of them are good. But when it comes to like movies and TV shows, we have Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
That's like the only good one. And we had Game of Thrones for a long time until it, jumped off a cliff. But
into a solo cup that they left on set.
Wasn't it a Starbucks
Yeah.
cup?
Oh, it was a Starbucks cup.
So
How
I think
dare you.
it's
Get your lore
really,
right.
really disappointing that there are a lot of scenarios where like other media, I think because other media tend to be under more constraints of like, we need to hit this amount of people to buy our thing or watch our thing to get a next season or to tell the story we want to tell. Whereas a game, like generally you can make a game that will end. Like you have an
God, remember when
endpoint
those
in
were made?
mind.
Remember when video games had like a nice decisive ending and was like satisfying both from a story perspective and a gameplay perspective?
No.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a situation where games like, and the games also have the advantage of being able to like, people don't tend to care as much about the setting making a ton of sense, because it's more important to follow, like for at least a lot of like RPGs and especially JRPGs, to follow the rule of cool of like, is this fun? Is this cool? Is it something that your player would want to do? Like, I don't care that Cloud, it doesn't make sense that Cloud could backflip off a train because it's awesome.
Well, yeah, I think, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but I feel like for a lot of people, and it's completely valid, but like for a lot of people, like a video game setting is just a justification to have cool stuff mechanically and like from a gameplay perspective. Like whether like you say, whether it makes sense, it doesn't matter. If it's cool and it can lead to cool things, then who really cares about the specifics? You know?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think good examples of that always Final Fantasy is a good thing to look to of how you can pull off that weird, not quite steampunk, not quite fully fantasy aesthetic that's kind of become associated with Final Fantasy, at least the newer ones. Well, I say newer ones, I mean I really just mean 9, 12, and 11.
Yeah.
And 14 also has that aesthetic, but like 15 and 13 are very different. It just is like a very fun environment to be in where you can have like guns alongside magic, alongside weird cat people. So it's just cool to see all that stuff in the same setting and be like, okay, this I don't really care if this doesn't make perfect sense because it's really fun. And this is the classic example of like weird CRPGs that exist on PC, like Arcanum, where it's a super interesting steampunk setting that's got a ton of weird stuff going on. You just have games that are like incredibly strange, like Gunfire Reborn's a roguelike, but you play as a cat with that dual wields guns. So it's just something you don't really tend to see often in other forms of media of these weird settings. All right, Wyatt. I feel you. Oh, Brett, you had something else?
I'm sorry. I had another thought. My brain does that sometimes. I think a lot of where that comes from is because, especially the way you described it, Ryan, it feels very D&D. At least the campaigns that I've been in, and like,
Yeah.
you know, how many of those games that like were brought up as examples are like based off of like at least the concept of D&D, or like have the veins of D&D in them. Like the very first Final Fantasy and like Dragon Quest and stuff exist because they had fun playing D&D and had to make a video game off of something. And I feel like it's a lot of the way for a lot of RPGs.
Well, and I think it also stems from the fact that for the longest time, games just were so they didn't have enough time to really explain their setting. So they're like, because literally all they had time for was, let's have these cool things, and I guess, I don't know, maybe this setting to justify it. And with the exception of like an instruction manual that came in the box, right? They didn't really have a lot of time to explain the world that you're in, and that was purely like its only purpose for the longest time. And I think it kind of stems from that for the most part. Like I think just now we're starting, like, because when you think about it, like games as a medium is still pretty young, right? It's kind of like weird preteen who am I phase, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I feel like more recently we've only really started like showing an interest both in terms of like for developers and for players to be like, I want to know more about the world, not just how it can make cool stuff happen. You know, because I think more people are starting to realize that it has more potential than that, and so I think we're only just now starting to like justify the world from like a logistical standpoint, and not just how can it make the game more fun.
Yeah, and I also think it's important that like the biggest thing that concerns me with that is that games, at least the AAA games, will hit the point of being like too concerned with making sense.
Yeah.
And then there's
a balance.
Yeah, we'll lose gyms like Mario, Sonic, stuff like Katamari Damacy, where the game has lore and it's really in depth, but the gist of what you're doing is just rolling up people into a ball. People and objects into big balls and rolling them around. And that's really fun.
Yeah, and of course I'm not saying every game needs to justify its world now, but I'm just saying it's great that we're seeing games that have an interest in doing it and doing it well.
Yeah, so long as those games are doing a unique setting. Like I think Days Gone's a good example of that, of a game that does a lot to justify why the setting is the way it is, and like they openly address questions like, well, this zombie plague is really recent. How is it that like every major city instantly went down? They're like,
oh,
well,
there's a whole storyline.
Centers.
Yeah, and there's a whole storyline dedicated to like
explaining the world.
To explaining how the zombies work, which is actually really interesting. And yeah, and just the idea of being like a biker in a zombie apocalypse already, I think, is an interesting kind of point to start off of.
Yeah. I just think it's important to recognize that, like, oftentimes games don't need more than you are Mr. Doom guy, you have a shotgun, and there are demons on Mars.
Definitely not. It's just nice that now we have the option to have
Yeah, I just think it's
games
like
that do that.
games are the only form of media where you can really get away with that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And if it's an indie game, that's charming. Like, people don't tend to want, out of what would be like a 10-hour experience, you don't often want them to spend a lot of that time setting up the world. You would rather just experience it.
But I also feel like the best games are ones that you can have it both ways. Like, you can just play through the game just to play it, and you can kind of skip a lot of content that is there to explain the world. And if you want to stop and smell the roses, you can, but you can also just go on and play the game and still mostly understand what's happening in the central story without having to do that. And I think there
that
are
only
some
applies to that doesn't apply to every genre though.
No.
I'm more talking about like indies right now of things that do those weird one-off settings that they don't have time or the money to explain their setting. So it's just a weird thing. Like, I love that exists. So there can be like,
definitely,
this weird mech game where you're flying around in the clouds because the planet exploded for some reason. I just love that exists.
Why? Who cares?
Why? It doesn't matter. Like,
yeah, exactly.
What matters is the fact that there's no ground, so you can like railgun people to infinity. That's what matters. Yeah. So I think that's just really where games tend to shine, is just like the innovation of these crazy settings that like wouldn't get made otherwise. Especially because they have the advantage of like a game can choose an art style to match the intent in the setting, and they're not locked to like using actors or using CG animation. They can do whatever they want. So like there are detective games that use real people doing full motion videos that work really well. There's stuff like Wind Waker where it's just super cartoonish and fits the setting super well. Yeah.
You're stealing my next point.
Well, maybe I'm just providing a segue into Wyatt's next point.
Oh. There's one thing that I hate, and it shows up not just in video games.
Only one?
Quiet you. Look, if you want to know what I hate, just go watch a couple of episodes ago. Anyway, we got you covered if you're at all curious for some reason. One thing that pops up in everything, whether it's games, movies, books, TV shows, whatever, is what is passionately called dial exposition. And it is one of the worst forms of writing ever. It is, you're trying to explain a world, or you're trying to explain a relationship between two characters, but in order to do that, you have people talk not like human beings. And they're just awkwardly trying to get information out to the viewer or the player in a very awkward, bad way.
Well, it's also why like amnesia is such a crutch that's relied upon for every form of media, because it means your protagonist doesn't remember everything, so someone needs to explain to them how the world works.
Yeah, I mean, you were able to get the gist of Mass Effect's world really, really well, and you didn't have that issue. Like, you're Commander Shepard, you're like a respected commander, and you don't have to be introduced to the world because the player character also has to be introduced to the world, right? And God, the example that pops into my head every single time, because I saw it, someone sent me a clip of it, and it scarred me so much that it never left me. Call of Duty Infinite Warfare has one of the worst
I played
bits of dial exposition I have ever seen. It is horrible. It is literally the beginning of the game. There's like a narration from Troy Baker, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we're in a war with like Korea or whatever's going on." And he's like, "Yeah, I signed up to the military with my best friend Will." And then he's like, and then this guy's talking to the main character. He's like, "Yeah, I signed up. I signed up because of the old man, because I wanted to get away from him." And then the other guy's like, "Yeah, I signed up because of the old man too." It's like, wait, is that? Wait, you two are friends? Wait, what? Why are you talking like that? You two would already know that. You're about to go into war, and you're talking about why you joined the military. You two are best friends. You would already know this. Why is this here? It is just so awkward and bad and only there just to inform the player. And it is so just like heavy-handed and just so poorly written, and I hated it, and it just made my skin crawl.
And that just demonstrates like games still need to follow filmmaking principles oftentimes. Like when you're designing a camera,
or just writing principles, not even filmmaking principles, just writing principles.
So I was saying filmmaking, so I was about to go into a camera comparison.
Please proceed.
When you're doing like cinematic shots in cinema, apply to games because they're similar. Like framing and whatnot still has the same rules in video games, except the player has control of the camera a lot of the time, if not all the time. So you need to make sure when you're making a camera that your camera needs to be able to frame things in cinematic ways despite it being in the control of a player. So there's tons of tricks you got to do.
Unless you're an incredibly skilled developer and you know how to have great cinematic framing, whether or not you have control over the camera. Like 2 examples, like we were just talking about BioShock. I think BioShock, even though it's a first-person shooter, has such great like cinematic framing.
Well,
of,
it
like,
pulls
the
it off with the
reveal
level
of an
design.
area.
Like the level design
That's what I was getting to. Uncharted is another good example. No matter what the heck your player is doing with the camera, if they're like messing around and just being dumb, you're always going to have a sense of awe when you walk into an environment because it's so well designed, because it's designed in mind that like, yeah, we're not going to have control over the camera a lot of the time. So how can we design it in a way that it's still going to grab your attention, whether or not you're actually paying attention or not?
Yeah. I also do want to like definitely call out dial exposition. I think that the genre that is always super at risk of doing this is of course RPGs. Like I don't think I can think of an RPG I have played that has not had some form of dial exposition legitimately. Like I'm thinking back, I think every single one has had at least a few lines of terrible dial exposition, which, you know, it's not a killer for a game at all. Like you can get over a line or two of bad writing, especially if it's for the sake of like a tutorial or something. But
or it's such a big game that like in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot more writing.
I think like MMOs especially do this all the time of like when you're a player logging into the game and then suddenly they're like, okay, you gotta go kill a boar because you're stupid and don't know how to do anything. So go kill this woodland creature to demonstrate that you are a functional person.
Oh, chosen one, show me your grand strength by slaying this pig.
I always think that's just so hilarious. Again, I gotta give a shout out to Final Fantasy XIV for it does have dial exposition and it's pretty bad. Like it's a Final Fantasy game and they tend to have a little bit of dial exposition sprinkled in there that's awful. But there are some excellent bits of like there's a city in the game called Ishgard where you do some cool stuff and it's like it's basically like almost a Dark Souls style city of like it's built around a holy church and whatnot. But a lot of the time they try to like hint at things being corrupted, but you don't actually directly interact with that. And then I went and did a side quest about unlocking the Dark Knight class, and the dude is just like, yeah, no, what we're gonna go do is these temple knights just beat up an old woman and are like gonna go take and execute her or something, and they're like, she didn't do anything wrong. So what the Dark Knight class is in that game is you just get so angry at people being mean that you pull off a greatsword and decapitate them. So
that's awesome.
But it was a really good moment because that side quest ties in with both the Dark Knight's backstory of what their whole deal is, and I'm obviously simplifying it, but it also ties into the city you're in, and they're being like, yeah, this is not this whole religious temple thing doesn't work. Like everyone is corrupt basically, and it's a good way to demonstrate that. All right, Brett, I feel you. Well, Wyatt, you gonna finish out
I did want to finish. I did want to finish one more thought. I know I did say that Mass Effect does like a good job of explaining the world without dial exposition. On the other hand, it is a little, at least it was distracting for me to have like your player character be this like battle hardened, experienced commander, but he has to constantly ask what these things are. It's like, shouldn't you know like what like shouldn't you know what the like the genophage is and stuff like that?
Like
but
what
if you have to ask
biotics
about
are.
Yeah,
The
it
thing that stands
is
out
a
to me
little
is like
strange.
biotics are the bit where I think maybe Mass Effect is guilty of some dialogue exposition.
Or and again, the big thing that sticks out to me, it's like, wait, how do you not know what genophage is? Wait a minute.
I mean, I think genophage makes more sense to me because the galaxy's huge, so they could have just been in a different part of the galaxy. Like I can,
Right,
I
but
can
if you're a
justify
commander, but if you're like a commander, that feels like something that you would know about.
Well, I mean, because it's part
I'm
of the games. Like that's a thing where I think you can kind of abstract it as like, okay, Shepard probably just wasn't in that part of the universe at this time, so wouldn't really be aware of it.
but it's a common knowledge, sort of.
I mean,
from what
in
I
that part of the
remember.
universe, because the game takes place in that area for the most part. So of course it's common knowledge there, but like you can abstract that to be like there are justifications you can come up with for that make sense.
But they didn't make those.
Well, I'm trying to get to the other point. I'm not trying to
Okay.
hesitate on that. It's just like
Okay.
that is, I think, more forgivable than the like Shepard doesn't understand what biotics are.
That's fair.
Because like biotics are a universe thing that happens everywhere, and you can start the game as a biotic, and then you still get biotics explained to you. Which is,
right.
I don't know how they solve that problem, because I think you have to do it, because you got to explain somewhere how you have weird telekinetic powers. Like that's got to be explained somehow in a game that is like semi-realistic in how it does its setting handling, like tries to explain things. But I think that is like the far more egregious example of like.
No, I do agree.
This is something that like really doesn't make sense why you have to have it explained. But at the same time, it's not a huge issue because like you spend 5 minutes on that over the course of a 60-hour game.
Right. It's distracting, but it's ultimately not like.
It's inconsequential. Is what I would kind of say. Yeah. Brett, you've been simmering, waiting for the pot to boil over.
Well, it's the thing. I'm cheating. It's the thing you said before, but I was going to say it anyway, so I'm going to say more on it. Games have a kind of for a long time they've had a weird hurdle to get over that movies just didn't really for the longest time. Of movies, you point that camera at a real person, and most of the time they look like a real person because that's what they are.
I see this guy.
In games, well, that thing is made of squares. So you got to do a really good job to make those squares look like a real person, or like a real horse, or like a real I don't know,
they could
mountain
be
or
made
tree.
of triangles.
Or they could be. Oh my god, what's the rasters? I don't care. Vector.
It could be vector drawn characters.
Vectors.
Yeah. Do you guys know that the Metal Gear Solid Game Over screen is actually vectored? So even though it's a PS1 graphic, if you play it on the PS port, it's like incredibly smooth looking. There's my side fact. Anyway,
That's great.
It's and you know what? I think Metal Gear Solid is actually a great example, because if you're looking at it on paper, those people look like garbage. They don't even have faces. They're horrible looking. But at the same time, and I know I'm not the only one that thinks about this, they are so charming. I think that when games have like to really try to find other ways to get like past those graphical limitations to make something that like fits the way that it is quote unquote filmed and fits the setting that it's in, that is 100% more successful for me than it trying to be quote unquote realistic and be in that fantastical setting, because the setting's not real. So the things in it don't have to look real either if it's all stylized well. And Wind Waker is a good example. The Final Fantasies that aren't 7 are a good example, because 7 doesn't, the people
like
don't
every
look so
Final
good.
Fantasy before 7, and like after, until we hit like 12.
Yeah. I don't know. It's that level of stylization that you can get in a game that movies usually aren't like made in, and books. Who cares? You never. I hope you're really interested to see a book written in a world where everyone is made out of like low poly bones and we're really like chipified. but yeah, that's the thing that only games have to quote unquote worry about, and I don't think they really have to worry about it anymore as much as just like embracing it to fit the style of the setting that they're in.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think great example of a more recent game that does this is Persona 5. Like, Persona 5 is hyper stylized, and that game looking even semi-realistic would probably be far worse than what it actually looks like. I think Pokemon, another good example of, like, Pokemon is not a franchise I want to see be realistic. Basically ever, because I would...
Yeah.
Get me out. I don't want to
So
see fuzzy Pikachu.
You were not a fan of the Detective Pikachu aesthetic.
Actually, no, I am. I think Detective Pikachu's aesthetic works well for film. I don't think it would work well for a game.
Ugh.
Like, I think that is probably I think that is probably the best they could have done in a live action Pokemon game. I think a live action Pokemon film. I think if they're making Pokemon films, they should probably be looking at animated and not live action.
Yeah, probably.
Pretty much all the time. But they wanted to make a live action Pokemon movie. I think that's about the best they could have done.
Yeah, I guess so.
And sometimes I really do just love that we have flesh Mr. Mime.
Oh God.
I love that he has dodgeball shoulders.
I don't like
that's my favorite part.
That's such a weird choice.
It's literally the exact like pattern and texture. Like what? No, don't get me started.
So confusing. It might be a pattern and texture from a CGI dodgeball from something. So it's hard to know.
Look, we gotta give Mr. Mime shoulders, and this trailer's got to be out tomorrow. Oh, I got this dodgeball model over here. Perfect.
Good enough.
Perfect. I'll never notice.
Yeah, because like I think the thing I've been realizing, especially in the last few years of game development, is like I tend to have more fun in the games that don't go for ultra realism, because like when you go for that ultra realism in something like The Last of Us, you add a lot more realistic things to tie to. Where like I don't mind hyper violence in a Platinum game or Doom, because it's either demons that don't look very human, or it is completely different, like stylized graphics with a lot of weird visual effects happening. In The Last of Us, it's hard to look at things. Like I can't really stomach playing that game for any extended amount of time, because it is just too violent. And like I'm not a person that generally gets offset by gore, but I think we're hitting the point where like we maybe don't gain so much unless you're doing it for a specific reason, which is why I think Last of Us isn't a great example of this, because I do think there's a reason the game does that. And it fits the game itself, but it is something I definitely don't want to see other games trying to emulate generally, because I don't think they would be emulating it for the right reasons. It's like
not everyone can pull off the justification for it.
Well, it's like if you're doing that, you have to address it, right? You have to address the fact that this is hyper violent, and you are making your player do hyper violence to people that are treated as real people, right? Like as soon as that happens, you get a lot more morally questionable of like, when you're a game designer, you have to be thinking of like, is what I'm designing and doing gonna have implications in any way that are not what I'm thinking? Like classic example that we've had on a project I'm working on now is that like one of our characters is a police officer, so we have to be super careful with how that character interacts with like certain things because of the political landscape right now. Like we have to make sure we are not perpetuating things that are happening, so you have to be really careful with when you're portraying stuff like that in a game that is very serious with your reasons. I think you gotta be on the nose with what you're doing and why.
It's the distinction between, are we watching, classic samurai movies for our, kill animations, or are we going to live leak and looking at some good old snuff to make sure that we get those bones crackling just right.
I mean, it's the kind of thing where like the Mortal Kombat animators have talked about this before, where they need therapy sometimes because of how rough it can be to do that. And I'm like, these brutalities are cool, but like the more recent Mortal Kombat, there are some that I struggle to watch because they are like,
because they have to top themselves.
Yeah, they're constantly.
They can't show something that's like lesser. Yeah.
It's like I'm not really getting anything out of seeing this character cut in half on a plate of glass and then sliding apart. Like it's not really satisfying to me. It's just very off-putting. But I get it. I get people that think it's fun.
For me, it's like, because like, and I don't play Mortal Kombat, right? But I'll occasionally just check out like some of the new fatalities because I want to see like what they look like, right? And because I guess I'm just really messed up in the head or something. But I think like in that instance, like if you compare it to the violence in like Last of Us, right? Like obviously completely different games, but the violence in Last of Us is very like grounded and gritty, and it's like makes me like it just it grosses me out. Whereas if I watch something like Mortal Kombat, it's so over the top that I find it difficult to like for it to elicit any feeling other than like that's kind of grody because it's so insane over the top. Whereas like again, Last of Us 2, it's like super like in your face, and there's a lot of like emotion. There's a lot of like narrative emotion to it that just gives it a lot more like impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's also why like I legitimately struggle to play that game, because it's the point where like when the game is having me kill a bunch of people and I'm like, well, I've seen the ending. I've played this game before, so if I'm going back to replay it, I'm now like, well, if I'm replaying it, what am I getting out of this experience that isn't just murdering people? And I think that's an interesting question to look at. I don't think there's necessarily an answer to that. It's more just a thing that you have to like think about yourself.
It's a case by case. It's a case by case basis with every game, because I think the violence in Last of Us, from a narrative perspective, is like justified. Like there is a reason for it to be depicted in the way that it is, and I think it ultimately aids the story, right? And just in the same way that like I do think it works for Mortal Kombat because it's so over the top, and that's what the series is known for, that they have to keep up that image, you know.
But yeah, imagine if Mass Effect suddenly had Last of Us levels of gore. I would be a little bit off put by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to know your setting and know your audience when you're working on this stuff.
I'm trying to think of, was there ever a game that was like the violence is like a little bit like much for me?
Manhunt and Rockstar was like Rockstar's Manhunt game is the one that's like was banned in most countries because it was too violent. Yeah, there's a handful of games that are like that. There's Hatred came out a few years ago and is literally just about running around town and shooting people.
Oh, speaking of Hatred, Agony was
Agony.
Yeah.
As well.
I played because I was just curious. I played the Succubus demo and I could not play for more than like 5 minutes because you hit a point. It's
just gross. It's like there's no. It's again like unlike Last of Us, it doesn't really like.
There's no point. Like
it's there purely for shock value. It's there to like sell copies on like shock value and just like grossing people out, and that's it.
Isn't that like weird? Because it literally takes place in hell. Like there should be a justification for it, and they're just the game isn't good, so there isn't.
Well, it's because they make you play as someone doing it. It's not like used as a horror shock value. It's used as you go up to like a human person and then just like eviscerate them to heal yourself. It's just like, well, I don't really want to do that. That's not really something I want to be doing.
Much better uses of my time.
And there's more graphic things that the game does that, like, if you're interested, feel free to either try the demo or look it up. I can't really encourage you to because I don't think it's worth it, but there's stuff in there that I don't want to like even describe because it is brutal to the point of just being like, why?
It'll get the video taken down and it'll get us taken
off
Twitch,
no, it would get us we'd get our episode a NC-17 rating, which we don't want. So yeah, I think that's a real issue that a lot of games face, and there are games that certainly get around it. Like Disco Elysium comes to mind of the other game I had like a couple hours to play about a week ago, and I got to a point where you have to talk to a character who is a raging racist, like racist to the point of being racist against everyone except his own people, who is like from this small island. And your partner is like someone who has dealt with racism before. So this entire conversation is you just trying to figure out how do you deal with this horrific racist. who is also capable of crushing you like a twig. So, and just because the writing of the game is so good, it can get away with that and like actually make it a really interesting conversation and have a lot of unique things, because it's never portraying being racist as like the answer, but it's portraying like, how do you deal with people like this? Like, what is the solution to either change their way of thinking, or like, how would you interact with this person to get what you need for your investigation? Which is really interesting. It's a super unique situation that I haven't really seen in any other games, of just dealing with like a difficult type of person that you see in real life sometimes, but never really see in games, because it's hard to write. Like, super hard to write that kind of character. So that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brett, I feel like Wyatt and I just derailed your entire topic. So what have you got?
Well, I was thinking a little bit, because my mind drifted, because I say at some point you guys started talking about something I just didn't know about, so I was like, I'm gonna let them go.
Go off, Queens.
The last thing that I had to say on like the kind of visual stylistic thing that games do more than the movies is, I think a specific thing that they do really well with it, and it's not really like sci-fi or fantasy specifically, but I feel like it's a lot more times in movies where, like, okay, it's a horror movie. You haven't seen the monster yet, and then it comes out and it's a guy in a suit, or it's like some really stupid looking, or like really like nicely designed thing maybe, but now it's like lit really well, or you can see the whole thing, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not scared of that anymore. That just looks cool now, or that just looks stupid now. Um, and a lot of games use not being able to like have a quote unquote good like full monster show off thing for their horror game, uh, like way better, where like, you can have a monster made out of like 45 polygons or something in like a PS1 game, and if you put that in like complete darkness, like a lot of indie horror games are doing now, like that is very successful in terms of like getting someone scared.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's what I was thinking
Yeah, I
about
definitely
when
agree.
comparing.
Well, it's that thing of like, you don't want to in terms of like a horror movie, right? If we're kind of comparing it to that, like, think of how long it takes for you to actually get a full view of like the xenomorph from Alien, because they keep him hidden, they keep the design hidden for so long, and they also change its design every time you run into it because it's evolving and it's growing.
Yeah,
And it does a great job of like, not only is the ship really dark, but it looks like the ship, so it like blends in way too well with the environment, and so you never know what it's going to look like, and it's that much scary because you don't understand it to the extent of you don't even recognize it when you see it the next time.
Yeah, I also think for games, it's like there's an entire subgenre of RPG maker horror games that
oh
can
yeah,
be really effective at what they're doing, because like, if you have a real mastery of what horror is and how to deliver that to a player, you don't really need visuals most of the time. Even more advanced than like a few things, but
I mean, Blair Witch Project.
yeah, like
Perfect
you
example.
don't. You need to have the framing, the narrative, the like mystery behind it all, but you don't necessarily need to actually have much in the way of visuals. So you can do some really creative stuff to get around that. Yeah. All right. So we're running up into our time, and I think we've covered a lot of what we wanted to talk about. So I think it's time to move on to shoutouts. Are you two ready?
I am ready.
Sitting
I'm
there
ready to go.
waiting. All right, Wyatt. Well, you spoke up. It's you first.
All right, great. Shout out to, because I'd mentioned Avatar: The Last Airbender and how it should be in more video games. Shout out to the Avatar: The Last Airbender Dreams project that is still ongoing and is looking really, really cool. If you don't know, I think it's just the one guy, and he's making a game in Dreams that is all based on Avatar, and he's been working on it for such a long time. And it's getting a lot of attention, it's getting a lot of buzz, and it's getting a lot of positive attention. So if you're someone who is into dreams and just likes to look around other, various projects and stuff, and you're into Avatar, definitely check that out because it's looking really, really cool.
Yeah, I also want to just say, like, that's part of the cool thing about Dreams is you can do those because I think it's one guy making the logic for it, but I'm pretty sure he's using like art assets that other people are helping him with because you can like freely change and modify things from other people so long as they set it up that way. So it can be kind of like almost like a crowdsourced game, which is really, really cool. One of the neat things about Dreams. All right, Brett, I feel you ready and waiting.
Well, no one has ever, ever, ever given this man a shout out before, ever in anything. But shout out to Nobuo Uematsu for
Oh, that was
obviously
sarcasm. Oh.
for giving me things to listen to when I walk up and down the hill every day that I have work at the top. Because man, some of the things that this man was able to do with like someone compared it to like painting the Sistine Chapel but with crayons, and that is just the perfect analogy for some of the things that he was able to do on PS1 and SNES.
Really impressive work.
I still listen to the 7 remake soundtrack while I'm working because it is 8.5 hours of pure fire.
It's so
Same
good.
thing. The 14 soundtrack, Nobuo did a lot of tracks for it. Not all of them, because Masayoshi Soken does most of them. But the entire thing is amazing, especially the stuff Uematsu does. It's sad, too, because Uematsu has recently said like the next game he works on will probably be the last full soundtrack he does.
Yep.
Man,
This man's getting
end
old.
of an era. All right, my shout-out, Final Fantasy XIV added this thing called Feats, which are these weird events.
I always wanted feet in my video games.
They might be called something different. It's feet, but with an accent mark. F-E-E-E, F-E-T-E, but the first E has an accent mark, which I don't know how you actually meant to say that. So it might meant to be like fates.
If you could change it to fate, would ya?
But it means that I'm gonna put the screenshot in general right now because it meant that I got to see this insanity of hundreds of players running around the streets of a city with giant Moogle stuffed toys, delivering them to vans. And this
Nightmare
is an image that will stick
or
with
dream
me
come true
for the rest of my life.
I can't tell.
It was the most bonkers thing I've ever seen. Of literally, like, I think every single player in that server, of like thousands of people, was at the same spot at this time because it's the new event thing from this patch, and it was bonkers to see a bunch of just people running around with giant Moogles. I didn't know how to react to it.
Sizes and everything. What the hell?
It was incredible. All right, with that, we've successfully done it. We've hit the end of the show. As always, it airs Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. on podcast platform of your choice and YouTube. Catch us live Sundays or Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern. We have a good night.
Adios.
Morning. Afternoon, wherever you are.
Okay.
Titty.
Dialect transition is really not that bad.
God. I'm just staring at this picture, just into the abyss.